Hi, and welcome to Positive Psychology. Now, a bit of a housekeeping note to make here. Please ensure you watch my videos, as the content in these videos and the content from your text are what will be used to create your tests. So it's really important that you use your textbook and the videos to help you in your study. You can follow along with your text as you watch the video, make notes, and also notice that the content that I'm introducing is not in the textbook, okay? So to avoid any confusion, some of the test questions won't be from textbook only. It'll be from these videos. Okay, now, I want to start out. Positive psychology. This is a relatively new branch of psychology. Psychology has been studied as a science since around 1879. And there have been many other branches of psychology that have emerged in the years that have followed. Positive psychology was introduced in 1998 by Martin Seligman. My interest in positive psychology was peaked in around about 2007. While I was teaching in the Police Foundations program, I was teaching a course in interpersonal communication and was looking for any sort of content that might help and had the potential to increase happiness and enable the access to happiness whenever one really needed it. And that's when I stumbled upon positive psychology, and in particular, gratitude and the work of Robert Emmons. Now we're going to look into gratitude and Emmons' work in Chapter 3. Now, have a look through your syllabus to gain some insight to what kind of content we'll be exploring regarding positive psychology. It's an important note that when you're exploring positive psychology, we are considering topics like happiness, positive emotions, subjective well-being, hope, flow, gratitude, to define what is positive psychology. We are not necessarily looking at the varied and the many things that might make you smile, laugh, or even feel good in the moment. This can, of course, and does, contribute. But positive psychology is much deeper than that. Positive psychology is a science that performs and conducts empirical research to determine what elements and life experiences or choices that we can make engage and gain skills, goals, competencies that we make part of who we are now and in the continued future. The ideas, strategies, and benefits we'll be exploring are both teachable and learnable. We're going to begin by looking at the emergence of positive psychology and its early influences. We will consider the current theories, look at some terms that we'll be revisiting from time to time throughout this course. And I'll be showing in these videos some surveys or actionable elements from your text or other sources that I have found that you could choose to engage with for your own benefit. It is also worth noting again, content in these videos that I make have other related content included in the video that's not in your text. This content is also on the test. So without any further delay, let's get started with Chapter 1, Positive Psychology and Well-Being. Now we'll start with some of the early emergences of contemporary positive psychology. The positive psychology focuses on scientific inquiry into positive aspects of human experience and the application of this knowledge in a broad range of clinical and non-clinical contexts. Now, it's important to note it's a scientific methodology or scientific process is systematic, and it's a process, so it indicates that there are steps And it's systematic in that you must go through step 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't skip. Positive psychology, as I mentioned in the introduction, was founded by Martin Seligman in the US in 1998. Now that's a very recent branch of psychology. If I remember correctly, the previous new psychology was from around about 1958, 1960, and that was humanistic psychology. So they don't happen frequently, but when they do, it becomes something. If it's got legs to run, if you will, it becomes significant. And Seligman in 1998 started positive psychology, and it's now a worldwide enterprise and a unifying force within psychology generally. Now, Martin Seligman, he was disenchanted with the traditional clinical psychology's focus on deficits, disabilities, disorders, and all that is wrong with people. I mean, a whole branch of psychology is known as abnormal psychology. So instead, his mission was to establish a new field of positive psychology focused on well-being, strengths, resilience, all that is right with people. Seligman drew a core group of influential and established psychologists and a group of early career psychologists who helped him sketch out a positive psychology of well-being and strengths. He encouraged members of this core group to found the International Positive Psychology Association, the IPPA, and to set up the Journal of Positive Psychology, the JOPP. Now, what's really important about a journal is it gives a forum for researchers to post additional research into a field of psychology. In addition, Seligman encouraged this same group to write and edit books on positive psychology, including the Handbook of Positive Psychology. Seligman set up the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania, and there he developed his first master's program in positive psychology, a major research program, and wrote best-selling books on positive psychology for the public. Now, it was in 1998 that he also used this appointment as president of the American Psychological Association, the APA, to launch positive psychology as a new field of study. So a lot of work was done very early to make aware positive psychology as a psychology and as a science was pushing and encouraging further development and further research to see if there was something here worthy. And it's turned out there has been. Positive psychology started as a small U.S. movement and is now a worldwide, highly influential enterprise affecting academic psychology and applied psychology. Positive psychology has been applied in schools, work settings, the military, and healthcare, including clinical psychology, around the world. Seligman distinguished positive psychology from traditions that focused on well-being, which science, notably, philosophy, spiritual traditions, humanistic psychology, pop psychology. Now, these traditions, they base their advice on how to achieve well-being on rational argument, rhetoric, faith, anecdotal evidence. However, but not empirical data, not facts, not necessarily research. Positive psychology's advice is how to achieve well-being is based on empirical research. Now, this is where I'm saying that positive psychology is a science, and as such, uses the scientific method for their research. Now, we're going to look at the method to ensure that that you have a handle on where the content for positive psychology came from, and that it's trustworthy, and why is it trustworthy. This content on the scientific method is not in your textbook. However, I feel it's really important to understand the strength of the research, therefore, the strength of the content for the course. So let's review. Now, if you've in nursing or in a lot of the science-based programs, you probably are already familiar with the scientific method. It's an orderly, systematic set of procedures that researchers follow. Again, there's that orderly, systematic, and procedures. Orderly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's systematic. It's just one links to the next. It's a system. And procedures. You must do them in the order in which they're there. Now, this is an approach for all sciences based on sciences-based topics and fields of study. Biology, sociology, health sciences, they all include the following process. One is to identify a research problem. Why do you need to do the research? What are you trying to find out? 2, design a study to investigate that problem. And then 3, collect and analyze the data, draw conclusions, and then 4, communicate these findings to others so that they can see the results and attempt to replicate them themselves. Now, there are 4 goals of psychological research. The first goal, describe. Well, what you're doing is describe what is happening. Make notes about what occurred, the behavioral or mental processes. It's limited to behavioral mental processes because behavior you can see. Mental processes you can hear about from the person you're asking questions of. So if you can't see it and hear it, you can't count it. And so they make notes about what occurred as accurately and as completely as possible. No interpretation, no bias. The observations are the data. Usually a good starting point when pursuing a new area of study is to get new data. Number 2 goal, explain. Once one has described, you might want to explain why is this behavior or mental process happening. An understanding of conditions of the behavior or mental process, confirming cause and effect. And we'll get back to that point. Keep it under your hat, as it were. Under what circumstances do these behaviors occur? And then 3rd, you might predict. When will it happen again? Identifying the conditions on which the behavior or mental process occurs, then we may be able to begin to predict under when or under what circumstances that condition will reoccur. And then 4, the 4th goal of psychological research is control. Or more to the point, how can it be changed? Apply the principle to prevent unwanted occurrences to bring about desired outcomes. Now, you and I, we're not scientists who routinely use the scientific principles and goals of the study of positive psychology. We can, however, use other very important thinking skills which can be used every day as well as in our education. Critical thinking, the thoughtful analyzing and probing questions, statements, and arguments of others. Critical thinking helps us to sort out the truth from fiction. Be a skeptic. Take nothing for granted, not believing just because things are in print or were spoken or written by someone that you thought might have been an authority. So, some principles, basic principles of critical thinking that as humans engaging with the world, to be a critical thinker is to act deliberately into the world. So some principles of critical thinking, and as mentioned, be skeptical. Insist on seeing the evidence. No evidence? I don't support it. Evidence? All right. Examine the definition of terms. If the terms aren't well clear and understandable, then that could be in itself a problem. Examine the assumptions or the premises for an argument. Be cautious in drawing conclusions from the evidence. Consider alternative interpretations of research. It's not to say that everything that comes out of the research is going to be exactly what the research hypothesized. Sometimes it's not that way, but that doesn't mean bad. Avoid oversimplifying and overgeneralizing. Now, those seem like reasonable things to expect, but do we actually do them, especially in our educational career and our potential future professional career? Now, that's just the overall thinking, the scientific process. But next, what we're going to have a quick review of is what is the experimental process. Once you've decided you are going to do some research, you need to follow the experimental process. So the first thing you do, and it's not unfamiliar, what we've already heard, is that you begin to formulate a research question. You don't do research unless you have some degree of doubt or question that you need to find an answer to, or describe and explain, control. Those are important, but formulate the research question. Secondly, hypothesize. Now, another word for hypothesis is educated guess. It's a specific statement about behavior or mental processes that you can see and hear, therefore you can count. It's a prediction about a potential cause and effect relationship between two or more variables. Now that we'll come back to the variables. 3, you test the hypothesis through controlled methods such as an experiment. You try not to confuse correlation associations with cause and effect. Now, I've touched on it there, and we'll come back to it. This cause and effect of one item causes another, or a correlation, and they're not the same. Research sampling. Now, all research has to have participants in it in order to test out your hypothesis. So research sampling becomes very important in any research question. A research sample is a part of a population that is studied in order to reach conclusions about the entire population. Now, as you can imagine, we could not study a whole population. We need to select a representative sample. Now, the representative sample mirrors the population of interest. So that includes all the subgroups in the same proportion as is found in the larger population. And this acts as a way to ensure a selection bias is not interfering with our findings. We don't want to bias our selection, because then that will sort of bias the entire research. So we can look at what is a selection bias. Selecting participants and assigning participants to experimental and control groups at the beginning of the experiment that will predictably affect the outcome of the experiment. If I make adjustments to say that I want to see whether glasses help people read or not, and I get only people with glasses in the experimental group and nobody else who don't use glasses, then I won't really be able to know, because if everybody's got glasses, my research is going to say, yes, of course it has an effect. But we really don't know, because we had nobody involved in the experimental group that didn't have glasses. So we'll come back to experimental group and control group. Okay, One way to attain a representative sample is by the use of a random sampling. In this instance, participants in the experimental and control group are selected by chance procedure. Everyone has an equal chance to be in either group. They can either be in the control group or in the experimental group, but this random sampling procedure controls for selection bias. All right, let's carry on with the experimental method. The preferred method for answering questions about cause and effect allows psychologists to control the experiences of the subjects and draw conclusions about cause and effect. Now, some of the terms that we can use or should be familiar with, and I've indicated we come back to some of these terms, is independent and dependent variables. Now, that's an important part of an experiment. Independent variables, treat this as this is the treatment. This is what you want to do to test to see if it works. So the independent variable is the factor or condition deliberately manipulated to determine whether it causes changes in another behavior or condition. So in this case, researchers will deliberately manipulate the independent variable. For example, does meditation help stress management for nurses in hospitals? Well, the independent variable is meditation. So the dependent variable is the stress. How will meditation affect the stress? If we do nothing differently than we always do versus if we do meditation. So the independent variable is what we manipulate, what we change, what we want to test. The dependent variable is any condition or factor that can be manipulated, controlled, or measured. It is measured at the end of the experiment. Okay, so that's our independent and dependent variable. We want to see what the independent variable does to the dependent. How does it change, manipulate, or alter it? And does it even do it at all? Now, the other two terms that I mentioned, control group and experimental group. Experimental groups obtain the treatment. That's the independent variable. The control group does not receive the treatment. The group is similar to the experimental group, randomly sampled, same distribution of the regular population. The group is similar to the experimental group, experimental environment. However, they do not and are not given the independent variable. They are used as a comparison. If we do nothing differently than what we always do, what's the effect? So controlling, now this is another component. Within the research, we've managed to control some of the bias. We've managed to look at the independent, dependent variable experimental groups and the control groups, and we've looked at our experimental method, but we also have to consider, mightn't researchers control or influence the expectations of an experiment? Don't we have to control the researchers too? And yes, so one of the control elements for researchers is what's known as a placebo. Oh, this is not just for researchers, I'm sorry, it's also for participants. The placebo effect. The placebo is a fake treatment or a sugar pill. Typically when a participant's expectations will influence the outcome rather than the independent variable all by itself, then they have to protect against the effects of expectation on the research. So they use a blind or double-blind controls in the experiment. So a blind in the experiment is just, it controls for the expectations of effect by the creating conditions where the subjects are unaware of the treatment. So when I'm giving out this pill that's going to make you smarter, those in the experimental group will get the pill that will make you smarter. Those in the control group will get a placebo, a sugar pill. They may think that it will make them smarter, but it won't. So if their expectations are that it will, it'll be interesting to see how that played out in the data. Now the double blind, it just means that the subjects and the experimenters don't know who's in the treatment and who's in the control group. That's probably the strongest support for expectations on the experiment. Now, one of the things I brought up a couple of times earlier, and I said we'd get to it, we're going to get to it now, and that's correlational research. Correlational research looks to explain phenomena by looking at other factors that occur alongside that phenomenon. So it expresses a relationship between two variables. It doesn't show causation. It just shows a relationship. So, for example, poverty. There isn't a cause and effect. Lost job doesn't mean poverty. However, when we research poverty, we find that a large number of people don't have work, don't have a home, don't eat well, affect their education. These don't cause, but they occur at the same time. So we say there's an association between these variables as to what might be the influence on poverty. Okay, now 2 other terms that are really critical to research: reliability and validity. Okay, validity is the extent to which a study or research instrument accurately measures what it's supposed to measure. Now that makes good sense. However, let's look at it from a weigh scale perspective. If you purchase a weigh scale that measures your weight, and you step on it in the morning, you look down to see what you weigh, and it says you're not very creative. When does a weigh scale measure creativity? So any research that doesn't have a tool that measures what it's supposed to measure, or research that didn't come up with an outcome that was in line with what it was intended to be finding, is not very valid. So research has to be valid. It has to measure what it's supposed to measure. We shouldn't be surprised. If we move to reliability, reliability is the extent to which a study or research instrument yields consistent results. Well, and that's important. Look at the weigh scale again. You purchase a weigh scale, you jump on it in the morning, you look down, and you've got a score of 150 or whatever your weight is. You jump off, gotta go to the washroom. You go to the washroom, you jump back on the scale, and you've gained 50 pounds. You jump off the scale thinking that's not right, and you jump back on the scale, and now you're 38 pounds. That's not a reliable weigh scale. It doesn't measure weight reliably or consistently, and that's why it's an important element. I just thought I should probably add an example that might make better sense of correlation. Why do students drop out of college? What factors might influence that decision? Correlation describes the strength of relationship between 2 or more variables. In other words, it explains how likely it is that you will find the 2 variables together. So, for example, student dropout rate and feelings of isolation are highly correlated. So when students feel isolated, they are at a greater risk of dropping out. We used a correlational coefficient to identify how strongly linked 2 variables are, and it can range from a -1 to a +1. And this means that the variables can be positively or negatively correlated. A 0 just means there's no correlation, they're not related. All right, I hope that helps clear up some of the things and gives you some good, solid, I think, perspective that the research that's done for positive psychology follows a lot of these scientific, systematic procedures, which is why what is being expressed as theory has strength. All right, let's look at the research results and the development of Martin Seligman's PERMA theory of well-being. Now, in 2022, his book that he wrote, Seligman that is, Authentic Happiness, proposed that happiness was the main outcome of interest for positive psychology, and it was due to three elements: the pleasant life, pursuing positive emotions; the engaged life, using positive traits and engagement in absorbing activities; and then thirdly, the meaningful life, cultivating meaningful positive relationships. All well and good. Additional research that Seligman did in 2011, in his second book that he called Flourish, Seligman replaced the authentic happiness theory with PERMA well-being theory. PERMA is an acronym based on the first letter of each of the 5 elements of the theory. Positive emotion, that's the P. Engagement is the E. Relationships are the R. Meaning is the M. Accomplishment is the A. Seligman abandoned the authentic happiness theory in favor of PERMA well-being theory because happiness, positive affectivity, having a positive affect, is normally distributed in the population, which is really kind of a surprise. I put up a graph here beside you, or beside me, for you to see. And that the graph I'm showing demonstrates that in 1995, Myers and Diner aggregated data from 916 surveys of happiness and well-being involving over 1 million people from 45 different nations around the world. They transformed all the data into a 10-point scale. 10 indicated extremely happy. 5 in the middle was neutral. 0 was unhappy. Happiness was approximately normally distributed. Now that just means that the average happiness rating was 6.75. It wasn't neutral, which would have been 5. Therefore, they concluded that the average person was moderately happy. Now, I've only just started into PERMA, and this is the end of part 1. Part 2, also in this week, I do this because I don't want to make videos too long, and I'll break them up into 2 or 3 parts. Therefore, we're going to explore more of PERMA in the next video and a little further, just a little further. Plus, we're also going to look at some other theories, and then what can we do to enhance and avoid obstacles of well-being and happiness. All right? We'll see you in part 2. Bye now.